Last month, at the end of 2017, our family took a trip to Legoland in Johor, just north of Singapore. And it was a good trip. It was fun. I could tell you about how great it was to visit Legoland as a 10-year-old. I could tell you about the rides, the wet park, uh, but you could probably read about those online. Check it out on TripAdvisor or something. But as usual, I like to tell you about things that I realized. And it was in the middle of this 4-day trip down to Legoland that I realized that our trip was entirely paid for by Bitcoin. The trip cost our family of three a few thousand ringgit, which comes up to just several hundred US dollars. So, not much in terms of the bigger scheme of things. But yet, halfway through the trip, I realized it was a free trip because I'd been buying some Bitcoin, not because I aim to get rich quick, not even because I expect Bitcoin to rise in value, although I do, but I bought Bitcoin because I believe in what it is. Nevertheless, I just used dollar cost averaging and bought about $100 of Bitcoin a month for the past few months. And so I had a bit of Bitcoin stored away in a few wallets. And what happened is, in the last few months, Bitcoin had risen dramatically, thereby causing my modest holdings of Bitcoin to rise up high enough that it basically paid for this vacation. So it's not a lot of money, but it's free. It's a free vacation for putting away a modest sum of ringgit. Ringgit is not worth very much, although I'm grateful to have it. One US dollar buys you about 4 ringgit. So 1 ringgit is worth about, what's that, 25 cents US. But these are all, in the end, play money. It's like if you're playing Monopoly, you could amass all all the money in that game of Monopoly. But the moment someone wins that game, probably you, if you've amassed all that money, you put the pieces of the game back into the box, and all that money is worthless in the real world. So right now we are playing a game, a real life game on the world stage. There's some money that is worth less, like the ringgit. Some money that's worth more, like the US dollar. But at the end of the game, when the pieces are put away, it's all worthless. There is no use for this money outside of the game. So, what do people do? They try to use this game money to buy things that are of value outside of this game. People exchange US dollars for gold because every time a fiat currency collapses, gold doesn't collapse. Gold tends to soar, not because the gold has suddenly become more valuable, but because the currency has collapsed in value. And what gold you could once upon a time buy with $1,000 or 1,000 units of that currency, you might need 10,000 or 100,000 units of that currency to buy gold as it collapses. So, those who know the nature of the game are always using the game money to buy things outside of the game that will still be of value when the game ends. Gold is one of them, has been for millennia. Why I believe in Bitcoin is because, like the money you keep in your bank, it is actually units of nothing, just numbers stored digitally. But unlike the money in your bank, it is a limited number of numbers. The Federal Reserve is printing about 750 million US dollars every day, the last time I checked. When you divide that over the, is it 500,000 US citizens? It doesn't come out to that much per head. If you divide that by the 7 billion people on Earth, it's not much at all. But of course, if you've been paying attention, you realize that most of this money goes to the 1% of the 1%. It is not divided equally among the world's population. It is not divided equally among US citizens. It goes mainly to the 1% of the 1%. The thing is, as US dollars are being printed at a rate approaching 1 billion a day, the value of each of those dollars goes down and down and down. And as some people say that Bitcoin will one day be worth $1 million, it is not because, like gold, it has suddenly increased in value. Although Bitcoin is a growing asset, unlike gold, which is more or less stable. One of the reasons that people say that one Bitcoin is going to be worth $1 million is because $1 million isn't going to be worth in the future what it is worth now. You might be able to buy a nice house now with $1 million. By the time Bitcoin is worth $1 million, you might be able to buy a nice car. In fact, at this very moment, you could buy a medium sized car in Malaysia for one Bitcoin. You'd get a nice Proton, actually. A pretty good Proton for one Bitcoin. So they say a Bitcoin is going to be worth $1 million someday. Maybe, but it may not be like a, New Year's Eve champagne popping moment because those numbers are just numbers of nothing. there will ever only be 21 million bitcoins produced. There is no limit to the number of US dollars being produced. Think about it, almost a billion US dollars every day being printed. Let's just be conservative and say half a million US dollars being printed every day. What's that going to do to the US dollars that you hold? Since the early 1900s till now, the US dollar has lost about 90%, over 90% of its purchasing power. And I heard one financier say that's pretty good for an asset to just lose about 1% of value every year. That's pretty good. That is pretty good if you think about the depreciation on your car or your computer. Okay, losing 1% a year, pretty good. But the point is that it's almost 100 years, which means it's almost 100% gone. And eventually, the game will be up, and it will be time to put away the paper money. And what will you have when the game is up? Gold is a limited precious metal. It cannot be created. You either have it or you don't. So gold is a limited something. Fiat currency like the US dollar is an unlimited nothing. There is nothing backing it except maybe blood and petrol. But beyond that, nothing. Nothing backing the US dollar. What's backing Bitcoin? Nothing as well. Nothing except trust. Because the Bitcoin blockchain is open to inspection for anyone who wants to have a look at it. So the total amount of block of Bitcoin that's been produced, that is being produced, that has ever been produced is on the blockchain and open ledger. And there will ever only be 21 million Bitcoin. And that is on the open ledger. So at the end of the day, Bitcoin is backed by nothing but trust. Just like the US dollar is backed by trust in the US government. A misplaced trust because really it's not backed by the US government but by the Federal Reserve, which is a related but different species of animal entirely. The US dollar is backed by misplaced trust in the US government. Bitcoin is backed by trust in the open ledger of the blockchain. Both are backed by nothing. The US dollar is unlimited and continues to increase in supply at a crazy rate every day. Bitcoin is limited and continues to decrease in the rate of supply. Every 4 years, the rate of Bitcoin produced is halved. So as time goes on, Bitcoin is produced at a slower rate until the day when it will stop being produced entirely and there will be no more new Bitcoin. But all Bitcoins that ever existed will be open for inspection on the blockchain. Every Bitcoin address is on the blockchain. Every transaction is tied to an address. The owners of those addresses are not published unless they choose to make themselves known. So it's not explicit who owns the Bitcoin, but the record of all the Bitcoin and all Bitcoin transactions are on the blockchain. So let's wrap it up. We started with Legoland. How did we get here? Gold is a real material, an incorruptible, indestructible precious metal that is, we presume, in limited supply. You can never create more gold. You can only pass it around. Fiat currencies, the US dollar, is nothing. There is nothing backing it. And it is increasing in unlimited supply. Bitcoin has nothing backing it, but it is increasing in a lower and constantly lowering rate of supply to a limited number. I'll just leave that with you. When this game of Monopoly is up, and the ringgits and the British pounds and the euros and the US dollars are put back in the box, and everything is wiped clean, will you have had fun playing that game of Monopoly? And will you have transferred the use of that Monopoly money into something that lasts beyond the game?